seconds and a click. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure that everybody's comfortable and ready for this. We're going to be using the questions box, and I'll explain that all in a minute. I want to introduce my co-presenters, Anthony and Gail. Can you all pop up for a second? There they are. Yay! Anthony is a senior educator for us, and he has done presentations on this topic and myriad others all over the world. And Gail Stern is co-founder of our company, yay, and also has done presentations on this and myriad others all over the world. So you are in good hands today. We're going to see them in a second. See you all later. Yay! Bye, y'all. Okay, Anthony's going to be forwarding my slides. So Anthony, can you go to the next slide? So we're going to start with logistics. If you look at that little box, it's to my right. It might be somewhere else, but there's a little box that has an orange arrow. If you pop that box out, if it isn't already, you'll see that there is a questions box. We're going to be using the questions box to talk with you today. We're using the questions box instead of the chat, so it's anonymous for you. I can read it, Anthony can, and Gail, but no one else on this call is going to be able to read it. So we can interact with you and keep it really interactive without having to let everybody else know what you're talking about. We like this option, especially for this topic, because it allows your employees, your staff, to ask us the real questions that they have about this, right? They don't have to fear how other people are going to think or feel about what they have to say. They can ask the real questions, because if they're not asking the real questions, we're not getting down to the real issue, right? So we won't be using the hands raised box. If you're on a phone or tablet, you're going to slide back and forth to see faces and slides, right? You can see a face or you can see a slide. It's your choice. And of course, if you want to make the faces bigger, you can click on the bar and drag us up and down, and that will make us bigger or small in relation to the PowerPoint. Next. So we're going to put this poll out here. So have you ever attended a Catharsis Productions training program before? So if y'all could just vote, great, fantastic. Okay, we'll let y'all vote for a few more seconds. 3, 2, and 1. We're going to close, and we're going to share that poll. So some of you have seen us before. Hi, welcome back. We're so excited to see you. And a lot of you haven't. That's why you're here. So let's get with that. I'm going to ask you one other question. Have you ever purchased a training program on sexual harassment before? Everybody's reading through their answers. Great. Cool. Okay. 3, 2, and 1, and we're going to close it up. We're going to share. So looks like most of you here, because you've not done this before, and some of you have, and they were great, and that's awesome. And I love that you're still here looking around to see what's out there. So excited. And also good to hear that good work is being done out there. So I'm going to close these polls. We wanted to do these polls also to show you one of the ways we make interactivity. Of course, you've seen these polls probably in other places before, but we wanted to let you all know this is the one of the ways we do it, and we like doing it in this format because, again, it's anonymous. We can make sure that folks feel completely clear and free to vote the way that they want to vote, right? So why do most compliance-driven programs fail, okay? Most of these compliance programs fail because they don't resonate with staff. Very often you have these trainings where people will just read the policy, just talk about the protocol, but they're not talking about why this should really matter to the staff, right? How does this work in your everyday lives? Why is this part of leadership? It can very be too didactic, where it's just talking at people instead of talking with folks, which makes it boring. Sometimes it's outdated, right? And people over-concentrate on the big quid pro quo question, which of course is important, but more than likely, and I think you all would agree with this, you're seeing everyday harassment in your offices, right? That quid pro quo does happen, right? But we're talking about the things every day that are happening that are really the things that are affecting our workplace culture. And the most important thing is they don't often offer solutions, right? We tell them everything that's wrong. We tell them don't do it. We don't offer them solutions for how we're going to actually change this culture and stop it. How all of us have the power to say something or do something to increase respect and reduce toxicity in our workplace culture. So we're going to share solutions, right? Because our formula is this: relevance, research, and rigor equals cultural change. So let me explain what that means. Awesome. So first, we're going to stay relevant. Relevant content for your team. We know that cultural change education is going to make that change if it meets your legal requirements and reflects your values, right? It can't just do the one. If it meets the legal requirements, that's fine and great, but we need to get people tied into the values, right? And we're going to provide that for you. It's going to be values-driven education that's going to check all those boxes for you. And it's going to be interactive, engaging, and relevant to adult learners. We do a lot of work with adult learners, and we understand what we need to do to make sure that they're connecting with this material and changing those attitudes and behaviors. And then, of course, teacher skills. And we want to teach them skills to help team members support each other, right? We want them to show up for each other, interrupt problematic behavior when they see it, and understand how to tell people to get help and resources, right? That's an important thing. The next thing is it's research supported. We implement best practices from research and continually review research literature to deepen understandings. We put out white papers. My department puts out what we call CPEEPS reviews for our educators, so they are on the cutting edge of what research says changes minds and attitudes and how we should teach this material. And we don't just look at one area of research. We look across many different fields of study. We look at advertising, we look at marketing, psychology, criminal justice, sociology, education, all of those things coming together to make sure that we are being relevant in providing the most engaging material for your folks. And then finally, rigor. We rigorously train our staff. Certainly you can ask Anthony at the end of this, because we're going to have a question and answer at the end, but our program presenters are rigorously trained. Hundreds of hours of training every year, right? We update our programs twice a year, which means the compliance in the click you see this year will be slightly different than the compliance in a click next year, because we have to keep up with culture. Culture changes, we grow. So we keep up with that by adjusting our programs, again, keeping that relevance. So we're doing that, and we're making sure our educators are rigorously trained. They get 2 major trainings a year, plus a several weeks long training to introduce them to the material, make sure they're strong on the background. And again, they have those teaching skills where we're going from teaching as a tool to teaching as an art. And then, of course, we're making sure that they understand the content and they have that mastery, like I just said. That's important. Thanks. We believe everyone in the workplace is part of the solution, right? We understand many of you might be HR folks out there, and that often falls to your responsibility, but here's the real news. You're one person. We need to get everybody engaged and understand their power in making cultural change, right? That's how we're going to end every program. So they are going to help you shift that culture. At the end of this training, your participants are going to be able to identify sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and retaliation, right? They're going to know rights and remedies and reporting options. That is important. Of course, we're going to give them a summary of the federal and state laws. But more importantly, they're going to know how to support folks who've been harmed, how to intervene to lessen that harm and increase respect. Leaders are going to know how to do this as well and have those conversations. And they're going to have practice responding to these incidences through scenarios at the end. And of course, when we look at adult education, the research on how adult education is best utilized, scenarios are one of the top things that we can do to make sure they get to practice those skills. So important. So we're going to cover everything that is required by the law. Almost all of this is required by the law, but we're adding the important piece about it, which is how can we create this environment where people are empowered to look out for each other and shift this culture. So probably you're ready to hear about it live and in action. So I'm going to bring Anthony and Gail back up here. I'm so excited for you to be trained by them. Literally 2 of the best, not only in the state, worldwide recognized educators on this. So I'm super excited. They're going to take you through a small sample of this program today. Of course, it's longer, but it'll give you a sense of what we do. And then we're going to be able to answer questions at the end. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to be looking at the questions box if you have any questions for me. And have a good time, y'all. Bye.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, I guess, do you mind if I get started first, Gail?
I don't mind at all. Thank you for asking for consent.
Oh, look at us, modeling behaviors. My name is Anthony DiNicola. He, him, his are my preferred pronouns. I am so excited for you all to be here. In all honesty, this is a wild time that we are living through, both with a global pandemic and what has been happening in the streets and in the hearts of so many folks. Right now, there is a reckoning with anti-Black racism and issues with criminal justice systems and all of that stuff that is going through the hearts and minds of not only y'all on this call, but myself and Gail and your employees. And to take this time to talk about how sexual harassment and bias crime is a problem is not an easy thing to do at these times, but it is a necessary thing that we all need to be engaging in throughout the years. And we are so proud that we are able to do this both virtually and eventually again in person when those days arise again. But I want to say thank you so much. I've been doing this work for a while now. I bring my heart and I bring my sense of humor and of course my stunning good looks to this work. And I want to thank you all for being here and being a part of this conversation.
I want to echo that as well. I think we often think that we're waiting for COVID to stop so we can get back to real life. And the challenge is this is still real life. And our businesses have continued, our relationships have continued, and this is an opportunity to practice new skills and new conversations, because regardless of what the world is going to look like in 2 weeks, 2 years, these are all relationships that matter. And we hope that this program will break all of this down, so whether they're working from home or working face-to-face, that the principles will still endure. And so with that, I'd like to pass this back to my colleague.
Thank you. So I want to get to know y'all a little bit. So I'm going to launch a poll for y'all to answer. It is basically what behaviors can negatively affect your workplace culture. The question in short is, what can make your day go from good to sour real quick? Biased speech, retaliation, all caps emails, sexual harassment, or all of the above. Feel free to give us some answers. I'll give you, how about 3 more seconds, 2, 1, and I'm going to close that poll and I'm going to share the results. So it looks like a resounding all of the above. I am very surprised. No all caps emails from this group. I'm guessing that the grammarians in your workspaces have won out. But sure, sexual harassment, retaliation, biased speech, all of those things most certainly can make a day go from good to bad. And let me pull up the next slide.
Because fundamentally, we're talking about components of a toxic culture. It's not any one thing. It's about how all of these influences intersect with each other. So if we're talking about biased speech, if we're talking about intimidation, if you're looking around your workplace and while you might not see what to you seems like explicit harassment, you may see systemic sex discrimination or racial discrimination when you're looking around the room and you're seeing who's at the table and who's not. And so in a longer program, we break down more of these elements so you can see how they all work together, where we can be a positive petri dish or a negative petri dish, because these environmental issues all contribute to whether or not there are reports, whether there's retaliation, and ultimately whenever there's accountability and positive pro-social behavior.
Absolutely. I like the reference to a petri dish. I was back in middle school science just now. I appreciate that. Yeah, I
I send you there whenever I can.
So I want to ask you all.
It's remote learning.
Tell us all in the questions box, how would y'all define what is sexual harassment? Or how would your employees define what is sexual harassment? Inappropriate behaviors, sure. Inappropriate behaviors of a sexual nature, yep.
Oh, I'm seeing it like they would define it as a legal or policy issue, like the paper that you've got up in the your little break room.
Break room,
Okay.
yes, next to OSHA.
Okay.
The no-nos of what to do in the office space. Absolutely. I think those are some of the classic definitions we hear when we ask what is
bad touch. Bad touch is up there too. Yes, I'm glad that we're all learning from our elementary school experience.
I think us talking about middle school science brought back a lot of memories for these folks. But yes, absolutely. As Heather was talking about, we have to talk about the compliance aspect of it. We have to make sure that we all have a shared understanding. Sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature in the workplace or learning environment, regardless of gender, class, race, sexual orientation, ability, belief, or identity, all of the protected classes. Sexual harassment can affect one person or, highlight this, many in a work, learning, or living space. Because we have to understand, as Heather points out, more often than not, and we've already seen it, the bad touch, the inappropriate, we think of the I'm going to use a name, Weinstein. We think of the quid pro quo, the this for that, a boss doing this, and we can sometimes forget about the inappropriate jokes, as Gail was alluding to. Who's at the table, who's not at the table. That might affect biased speech. It might affect what kind of jokes are being told, who's looking around before they tell a joke, the unwanted touch, and the unwanted physical contact. That no one wants to imagine sexual assault, rape taking place in the workplace, but we know far too many accounts of these behaviors going unchecked, creating this environment where not just one person, but many people. Weinstein didn't just make the workplace uncomfortable for the people he was harassing, he was holding in inappropriate regard, or withholding information or withholding jobs from. Think about the vendors, think about the culture that was created when those things went unchecked, and when people knew that this was happening, or assumed that this was happening, but didn't feel that they had the clout, the power to say anything about it.
And part of that is because he's enabled a toxic system where he has, whether active or passive, accomplices in ensuring that his behavior is excused, it's justified. So once again, when we think about an ecosystem, that toxic workplace, that one person is enabled and covered for by many people. And that can transform the way that your organization sees the severity of a crime or the impact of a crime. And I know I just used legal language, but I also want to add one additional thing. Weinstein is a very colorful, cinematically awful figure. And I think what we need to do, and what I think this slide does, is focus specifically on behaviors. We often think about so-and-so would never do something like that. They're not bad. We focus on behaviors because people can always be held accountable for behaviors that violate our norms and our principles. But if we can go to the next slide.
Yep.
The challenge within an ecosystem is that the ways in which victims of sexual harassment are treated after they report can also contribute to an environment that can subdue further reporting. The environment teaches us how far is acceptable to push back. So we see two major families of retaliation in the workplace: explicit and implicit. And as you can read on the slides, we have examples there, but I want to put a question out to you. Which of those things, explicit retaliation or implicit retaliation, cause the most conversation? What are your folks most confused about, whether it's explicit or implicit? And then I'll wait to see answers in the questions box. It's like being on a telephone.
It is. The calls are pouring in, Gail.
Yes, public radio.
This is while we're waiting for some answers. I still do this when I'm being on the phone. Young folks, this.
Seriously?
Yeah. Ask your 13-year-old.
This is awkward. This looks arthritic. Yes. This is like, no, this is me holding my phone.
Yes.
Okay, so
some people are bringing in that we hear about explicit more often. It can be more visual, but the implicit is where one person in particular is saying implicit because it's less obvious or overt. Yes.
I mean, you've heard the phrase gaslighting quite a bit in the news. And so you can have many survivors wondering if something is actually happening, where they're constantly having to challenge their own reality, where Are they being passed over? Are they not receiving credit? Was it because of something that they did? Either way, retaliation not only harms that individual survivor coming forward, it has a chilling effect on that entire workplace. It sends the unspoken but still clear message that their reports are not accepted and their beliefs are not valued.
Absolutely, and it's important that we talk about these things with staff because we understand when they see buzzwords like hazing, they may think, well, this isn't a sports team or a fraternity.
Yes.
But we can use tools by like helping them think about the office. Dwight and Jim is a perfect example. Jim was hazing Dwight, and there's an episode towards the end of the series where Jim is in a higher position of power, and he looks at the HR file and he realizes how many reports were made about it and has this realization of, oh man, that was wildly inappropriate. We laugh at it because, those, it was a sitcom, sure. But when we stop and think about if that was really happening in the workplace, those things do add up. And we may not see being passed over for promotion opportunities because we may not know who's up for promotions or opportunities. But taking credit for work, it so brilliantly points back to what you said, Gail, earlier of who's in the room, who's not in the room. More often than not, it's the person who might be in the room but is overlooked in those situations because maybe they are a member of a marginalized community, but they might feel tokenized for just being there because of their identity.
Was a member of a truly marginalized community, many of them probably. But you also point out, just briefly, Jim is our hero, our likable character, which means we are not critiquing or judging his behavior the same way. Much in the same of a workplace, if the person who's engaging in the harassing behavior is popular and liked and successful, they experience cognitive dissonance trying to square what that person is accused of doing and how they feel about that person in general. So we're going to talk about what's the call, which is how do you operationalize all of that technical language? So let me ask you this. I'll put this out in the questions. Flirting with someone at work. Would you say that this is bad for work? Would that constitute sexual harassment or creating an environment where there could be a tolerance of sexual harassment? How do you feel about flirting with someone at work?
Is this cool or not?
Yeah, people are saying it's possibly okay if they're peers. Because a lot of us have met partners at work or have dated at work. I have done that unsuccessfully and have learned my lesson multiple times. Okay, someone's saying absolutely never if there's a power differential. So I'm assuming you're talking about supervisor, right? Someone who has power over you. And okay, this is awesome. Someone also is saying specifically that even if there isn't a power differential, it can make folks around those people uncomfortable. You don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but you also know that shouldn't be contaminating your workspace because it makes you uncomfortable as well. And fundamentally, it's not professional behavior.
Absolutely. How about this second one? Saying, oh, wow, you really do pass for a woman. Is this okay or not okay?
Oh, that was fast.
Yes. And so let me ask, why is this not okay? Everybody's saying not okay. So why? Why is this one hugely problematic? Yes, transphobia. Yes, good. I love we're getting so many one-word answers. Yes, transphobia that we understand and very grateful for the Supreme Court ruling that affirms that we have a lot of laws that say sex discrimination and understanding that it really means gender as well, that is a umbrella term, and that transphobia is not okay. It is not okay anywhere. It is most certainly not okay in the workplace. The problem with this, and what people are alluding to with saying transphobia, is this idea of people passing, that there's this idea of there's one way to perform gender, that there's one way to be a man, one way to be a woman, and that trans folks are not women or not men, that they are. Trans women are women. Trans men are men. That there is new language. We are coming to a place where we are stating our pronouns, and we are, as those of us who are cis, cisgender, meaning I identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, that is just a continuation of my gender identity. It's not that I have to announce, if I was trans, that I have to announce it. There is, unfortunately, we live in a culture where there isn't, that people do still live in fear of outing themselves when it comes to a lot of their identities because of bias that people hold and prejudicial thoughts. But we have to be willing to understand that we can question these things, and that transphobia by no means is okay in the workplace.
I want to add one quick thing. There are a lot of people right now who are learning new vocabulary and learning painfully the things that they may have said in the past are not able to say now. And so it is certainly possible that someone making that statement is being hostile and being explicitly, actively, intentionally transphobic. It could also be someone who thinks that they're giving a compliment. They don't understand everything that we just said. And so when we do our classes, we can provide those specific but generous corrections. And we can say, it's certainly possible that you thought this is what they wanted to hear. But let's talk about what you may not realize and understand. And then we give permission to the entire room to reflect and realize, whoa, that may not have been cool. And they get a chance to correct their own behavior because they don't feel shamed. One of the things we know here at Catharsis is shamed people don't learn. They get defensive. And so our challenge is to take this information and enable it to get through. So the last part, not responding to a coworker's emails, could that be considered toxic or hostile behavior in a work environment? I put that out there to my people.
Yes.
You see the same people that were like, no, all caps emails don't offend me. I'm perfectly fine with those. In fact, they make me feel alive. Oh, good. I'm seeing someone say, okay, this is excellent. They're saying that could be that kind of implicit retaliation. You're icing someone out. So sure, we've all made errors and not responded, but what this person is calling out is that this could be a pattern of exclusion, and this is your penalty for speaking up. Those are excellent responses.
And I also love someone is pointing out it could just be an error, and I don't want us to get too much into political correctness. And then it's absolutely right. What Gail and myself are talking about is understanding the breadth. And what this is the perfect example, as Gail was talking about, is we're not policing behavior. We're not telling people you can only say words from this list and not from this list. It's understanding that all of these things contribute to a culture, and that if this is going unchecked, if there are certain people based on certain identities that are continually being left out of the information loop, is there a reason behind that? Is this a pattern of behavior versus just a one-off incident in which, oh wow, sorry, I genuinely just left Jeff off the email chain. So sorry, Jeff, if you're on this call, I know that pain. I've been left off the email chain. But is it based on Jeff's identity, or is it just simply an error? And we want to make sure that all of this connects to what we're going to be talking about in a minute. But first, we want to talk about sort of summing all of this stuff up, how we end up making these calls that we are making.
So first, we're going to take a look at how is it being said. So someone may say in response to this, it's like you can't even say good morning anymore, which is ridiculous. But I would say, well, how is it being said? Because, hey, Anthony, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, and I'm Anthony's boss. And I have to be mindful of the power differential that even though we are sharing this virtual space right now as equals, that he always knows in the back of his head that I have seniority. So if I say, good morning, Anthony, I've completely undermined the professional relationship. I've implied something sexual. And the idea that there's that power differential that he knows in the back of his head has just moved to the front. Then we have what is being said. That stuff is probably like a whole lot more obvious, right? If the more sexually explicit that it is, the challenge for many people today is that sexually charged jokes or humor often occupy this ambiguous space where people are like, well, I said it before and it was okay, and maybe that person's just so sensitive. And so part of the ways that we engage in a diagnostic exercise is we say, is that comment increasing or decreasing respect in the workplace? that just keeps us honest. And that's a good way of not saying, are you a good person or are you a scourge of Satan? We're saying, let's take a look at the principles of respect, because we can make this overall assumption that we all want a respectful workplace. The second part I've already alluded to has to do with power and position, and it may not just be the fact that I'm co-owner of the company. It could also be all the different privileges that I have and how I could make someone feel marginalized, how my comment could take on, let's say, larger import because I'm white, because I'm cisgender, because I occupy a certain economic privilege. There are all these things that I may be aware of on a regular day and then not even thinking about on a regular day. But
and physical ability as well.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. So all of these privileges provide a context for the stuff that I say and the stuff that I do. And even though I may not be thinking about it, does not mean it doesn't have an impact on the people I say those things to.
Absolutely. Permission for contact. We start this program off by sharing, do you mind if I go first, and things like that. We can't physically connect at this point, but this is one of those things where we talk a lot about this, especially when we're in person and we're having these conversations. There's a classic story from when we were doing this program on the West Coast, and we brought up, are you do you come from a hugging family or not a hugging family? And a woman grabbed her colleague and said, I'm a toucher. I'm touching you right now. That we may come from different backgrounds. It's all about how do we have those conversations. I am a very tactile person. I ask and I check in. I want you to know this is who I am. Is that okay with you? Now, I now have the onus is on me to respect the response. If my colleagues say, yes, I would love a hug every once in a while, yes, that's totally fine, then I can hear that and I can respect that. If they say, I ain't a hugger, don't touch me, I also have to respect that. And that it's wonderful. It's also very different. If we're talking, I was doing a program at Method in Chicago, and we talk about those who are working on a line, the idea for physical contact is a slightly different conversation. If something is coming off of a press and someone could physically be hurt, grabbing someone and getting them to safety is very different than a touch on the arm. If you're working at a workspace and you are constantly looking at a computer and someone needs to get your attention, a touch on the shoulder is very different than a caressing touch or any of those things. That we can have those conversations, and we can make sure that we are checking in with our colleagues, and that these conversations don't have to be awkward and uncomfortable. They may be uncomfortable because we're not used to having them, but we want to check in because we don't want this to become the last bullet point, a recurring issue. Any of these things. If someone is constantly physically oppressing someone, constantly making sexualized jokes, constantly touching someone after they've clearly been told, I don't want to be touched, this becomes this pattern of behavior that goes from, oh, I was once left off of an email, to I'm constantly being iced out, I'm constantly being left out, I'm constantly having these issues occur. This is when the issues go from no longer being a slight impact from a one-off to a hugely problematic.
Which is a great segue to this. You will find a lot of people in your office, if they're challenged by their behaviors, all of a sudden it comes down to their intent. I bet you've heard this. I didn't mean to do that. That's not what I meant. You know I'm not that kind of person. And there's cognitive dissonance in trying to square our own views of ourselves as decent people, as opposed to the harm that we may have done. And so we try to make sure that we explain that impact is always greater than intent. They're two very different things. And the fact that you didn't mean to hit my car doesn't mean you didn't hit my car and cause damage. I mean, we're not playing, this isn't a Christopher Nolan movie. There is an objective reality to some things. And this is where we're talking about giving people permission and the understanding to say, oh my gosh, I didn't mean that, but I see the impact that it had on you, and I'm sorry, and I won't do that again, which gives them the ability to acknowledge that they didn't mean to, but they did. Because again, overarching, this is all about not just encouraging professionalism, but encouraging humanity. And understanding the difference between intent and impact is fundamentally about understanding our impact of our humanity on somebody else's humanity.
Absolutely, and it makes me sad that we don't have more time with these incredible folks on the line, because just based on comments, this is a group that's ready to engage in these conversations and help bridge the gap. Honestly, we want to show how we go from these big ideas that Gail and I are talking about to the tangibles, like Gail was alluding to. What can we technically say? What can we say to someone in that moment? Because right now, I think of so many moments in my career before I started working at Catharsis where I felt uncomfortable by comments that just even colleagues at my own peer level had made, but I didn't feel I had the language to talk about how I didn't think that they were a bad person for what they said, but what they said was offensive, or what they said was problematic, and I wanted them to be better, but I didn't know that I had, as an individual, the ability to engage that person on a one-to-one level. And so at this point, we would talk through all of those technical skills. We want to show you an example of the type of scenario that we would walk your employees through. So let's say that this is a Zoom chat, because we live here now in these tiny boxes. So let's say this is a scenario where you have a bunch of colleagues. Sorry, hold on. I got a message. I just got a nude snap from Chris in accounting. What? Show us. He's hot. Then someone says, I'm surprised. He's a great guy. I'm sure it's a mistake. And then the original person who got the snap, disappears. Terry? Wait, is she gone? So tell me in the questions box, folks, is this a problematic scenario? Is this something that would be problematic in the workplace?
And is it realistic? Do you think this could happen?
A bunch of people saying yes, huge problem. Mm-hmm. That's a no-no. Yes, I agree. So what is the problem here? What is the problem with a scenario like this?
It's intimidating. Yeah, that's totally intimidating for Terry. Oh, and someone's saying that Terry's colleagues are excusing the behavior and no one's focusing on the impact on Terry.
Yes.
Like, if you're Terry's colleague, what could you do after the fact to support her?
Shoot her a text. Yeah. Check in. Absolutely. All of the different ways that you could check in. Now, you can be peer-to-peer. You could be in a supervisory position. Some people fear, we've got to go straight to HR. Maybe that's the thing, but we want to check in with Terry first and foremost. What does Terry want to do? What do our colleagues want to do? It's not our job to prescribe unless you are in a position of human resources or a managerial position where you want to make sure that you take care of the entirety of your culture, the entirety of your staff. But we want to first and foremost put the person who has had this behavior negatively affect them, put them in the driver's seat. What do you need? What can I do for you in this moment? Absolutely.
Would anyone challenge Chris from accounting very briefly? Yes. Again, Chris from accounting did this in full view of everyone else, yes? So that's where it becomes an entire cultural issue. And let's say it was intentional, that he didn't accidentally send this picture of himself, then he's testing the waters and seeing what the social market will bear. And it's up to the culture to push back. So how do we do this? How do we build it? And as a leader, but I think we're really all leaders. And that may sound like a cliche, but we all have the capacity to lead on this, which is why I think that word is so important. These are the questions that I ask myself and that I'm asking everyone to ask themselves. Do I actively think about what our organizational culture is, or am I just going through the motions? Am I just flowing with things and I take stuff for granted because I've got certain powers and all of these things don't affect me? Do I assume that if I thought it was bad, then everyone would think it was bad, or if I didn't think it was a big deal, then no one else should? We often do that. We often use ourselves as the main variable in understanding the impact of a system or as individual action on another person. And we're not, because some people, they're more vulnerable than others for all of the reasons that I described. And last, regardless of where I sit on the food chain, what can I do? And is that looking, again, who's around the table? Am I having meaningful conversations with my peers about what we took for granted and how we could improve our own behavior and improve the way that the entire organization looks? Because we know research has shown that the more diverse a company's leadership is and its entire teams are, the more successful it is. Bottom line, even if you are not compassionate and principle driven across the board, there's going to be someone who's going to perk up and say, what? Because we know the more people are at the table, the better we are at anticipating the needs of our clients, the needs of the community, and all of a sudden our team is more cohesive because we understand all these different points of view so much better. These kinds of programs help to maintain and nurture that diverse workplace.
And it's fun. Honestly, I wouldn't.
That got intense. I'm just gonna lighten this.
No, I mean, it is important. It is important to be, you, Gail, as a leader, you help to form the culture, and I'm not saying I'm, some newbie within this company. I've been with Catharsis for 9 years, but I have seen that it fosters, it takes work to maintain these communities, and that we have to do these programs sometimes act as litmus tests. How are we doing? How are we living up to our mission? We have these big things on our banners, but do we actually live up to those values? And do we enact those values on a regular basis? We love to start these programs by asking folks, what are the values of your company? Not necessarily the ones that are written, but what are the values, and when did you last see them enacted? Because that is the test of, oh wow, we actually do live up to these values. We can always do better. But I remember last week when X did this, and that made me feel great, and I performed better. Or I saw someone do this for somebody else, and it made me want to do the same. And if we are engaging in these conversations, we're doing the work so that when we get to those issues, when they arise, that we are not afraid of the conversation, that we are prepared for it, we have the vocabulary to engage in it, knowing that will be work. We will face those challenges, but we are stronger if we go at it together. And I like being a part of those conversations because it allows us all to bring all of ourselves to the conversation. I get to be me, and I'm not afraid of being me, and that I want to help foster that in other companies because it allows them to live up to their potential, to survive, and to be stronger on the other side of these wild times that we are living through. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn my camera off and mute myself for a minute so Heather can say some conclusory remarks, and then we'll be back to answer some questions.
Hi. Great job, y'all, and I really enjoyed watching all the questions come in. It was really exciting to see all the interaction. So thank you so much for participating. As you can see, our staff are engaging, accessible, and so knowledgeable about this stuff. And not only do we say our programs move from compliance to cultural change, part of my division's job is to make sure that's true, right? So we know that folks in a pre-test versus post-test will have a shift in attitudes after viewing a Catharsis Productions program, because we create programs that are going to resonate with your staff and focus on what everyone wants. A workplace where we all are respected and feel like we belong. And I don't think that's too much to ask. And I think it's accomplishable. We can do this, right? We're going to really talk about the issues. You saw a little bit sample of that, the gray stuff that confuses folks. That's often the richest part of our program, and often the part that people don't spend any time on in these things because everybody's getting caught up and making sure the policies and the protocols are covered and the law is covered. We need to talk to folks about how to make these discernments and how to educate folks about why these things are a problem so they can shift their own behavior, because we're going to teach them to critically analyze what's happening and how to help. So there's lots of stuff you didn't even get to see that are interactive exercises and conversation. I'm so excited that you got to see some of it. So we can click to the next slide, Anthony, and have questions, right? Anthony and Gail, come on back, right? If you all have questions for Anthony about the training process, Anthony's one of our lead trainers, and also since he's been here for 9 years, he's been through the training process. He can talk about it, right? Gail and I are content creators. You can talk to us about how did you come up with this content and how is it different than others that you've seen, right? If you have questions about purchasing this program, you're going to hit up Jatea McGee, Director of Corporate Sales, amazing human being. She's going to have a conversation with you, and she's going to talk you through the process on it. In fact, write it right down, take a screenshot, jatea@catharsisproductions.com. Very long email, but very, very worth the typing out because she's fantastic. So does anyone have any questions? Ben, sound off in the questions box. Oh, Anthony, somebody is asking about the training process. Could you talk a little bit about our training process?
Sure. So we make sure that with any program that we are delivering, that we make sure that our staff are subject matter experts, that before they've been hired, wherever their expertise comes from, whatever their education, it aligns with the learning objectives that we hope to cover in all of our programs, but it also aligns with our ethos, which is, or our tagline, which is fight fire with funny.
Right.
That we bring humanity to our programs, that it is not always, a laugh riot, but isn't it funny that we were able to engage for an hour and 15 minutes about bias, crime, sexual harassment, things that personally affect all of us in different ways, but we all were able to do it cohesively. So the training process is making sure that folks are in their learning objectives, that we aren't talking over our audience's heads, but make sure that we are hitting our learning objectives and facilitating a discussion rather than lecturing on anything. So the training process is all about that.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of questions, and I'm going to tell you a couple of questions about pricing because we have so many different packages. Definitely just reach out to Jatea. That is a longer conversation that we're going to be able to cover here. So reach out to her and talk to her about the different package options that we have. That would be the simplest thing. What, Anthony?
I was going to say, there are quite a few. Yes, I look at them and I go, I don't know what all of that means. I know how to deliver really strong programming. I don't know how to price these things.
They're beautifully wrapped.
So I think the last question we can just cover really quickly is, how have people responded? We've done this program, it's offered live for whenever we can be together again, and we offer it online. When we do it live, we call it Please Advise. When we do it online, it's Compliance and Click, same program. We just like to name things. So you all three of us have done this, but I would love to hear what some of the responses you've had to audiences are.
I think they're surprised, as was alluded to earlier, they're surprised that it was enjoyable. I think people go into these kinds of programs with a lot of anxiety and fear based maybe on some past experiences or the apprehension that they're going to be told that they're bad or they've done something wrong. And time again, they come out of it saying, I never thought of it that way before, which as an educator is like the best thing you can tell us, because you can see that you've begun like a catalytic process of reflection and behavior because they're taking it in. And I love that. I love that people come up to us after and tell us how surprised they were and how useful it was. Because this isn't just an awareness program. This is an action program. Yes, awareness is a component of it, but this is about, now that you know better, how do you do better? And I love it when people tell me they're going to do better.
Right on.
My favorite audience members to chat with are, and not to scare any of the older white men on the line, but how many older white men go into these rooms, these programs, and think, oh man. And there was a New York Times article a few months ago that talked about the rise of these programs and the sort of, we like to think we're at the forefront of rethinking. This is not a program where you're going to see a clip of, the creepy dude, creeping up behind and making the young woman uncomfortable. We're talking about, yes, that issue is there, but we've talked about that. We know what that looks like. What is the icing out? What are the other things that look like that are that might be more subtle, that might be more nuanced, that are honestly sometimes scarier to talk about because we might see them on a daily basis.
And for me, since I often work with the points of contact, and Anthony's done this with me for sure, we can custom fit aspects of this program to your needs, right? So if that last scenario you just saw doesn't resonate with your team, we have, and my colleagues can get, I have a folder of scenarios that is very, yes, it's a lot. And they're based on real life scenarios. We built this program working with lawyers, right? Though we don't talk about it in that sense, we knew that we had to make sure that we're using real life examples and that we were going to meet your needs so you feel good as the HR representative or the leader that you were going to be in compliance. So we take those scenarios from working with lawyers and working through the pilots. We piloted this for a year, and we got lots of feedback, and we built scenarios that are real and resonate with folks. And so talk to us about what your needs about that. You saw the gray area examples. We can switch up ones there as well. So just know that that's my favorite part, is making sure that folks are getting what they want out of this, to grow their program and to increase that respect and decrease toxicity. And I think that's all we're going to have time for. Everyone else on the line, please reach out to Judea McGee. She's going to be the best person to answer these questions. I had so much fun. I always love watching them teach, and I really appreciate you all, and I loved reading all the comments. So, you know, we always say around here, go forth and be awesome. Have a great day, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye. So I'm going to leave this up for a few more seconds. Folks can make sure they copy this down. I'm going to go off camera, but we'll still be able to read your comments. So here we go. Everybody can take the time to copy down the information.